Hey, and good morning, everyone.
Morning.
Uh,
Morning.
Very exciting to be here doing our weekly live stream. Before we dive into that, I just want to say thank you for everyone watching, liking, subscribing, and that we have a very special guest today. Katie Wallace from one of our great partners, Kaseya, is here to talk about some regulatory technology and compliance, which we'll get into in a second. I'm George Adamant, I'm president of Valiant Technology. I'll introduce my co-hosts, players here. Marianne, who's our training manager, Justin's our Vincina, our CIO, and Megan Quick, who works with me in sales.
Mhm.
So today's all about compliance. But before we get into compliance, check us out at YouTube, Valiant Technology. We have a ton of content up there. Love to have you any comments, any thoughts, questions, we answer them. So please submit there. But before we do that, I'm going to hand it over to Justin for the download.
So I wanted to talk a little bit today about something that we call tech debt. And this is really thinking about IT and technology similar to any other kind of infrastructure. So, for example, you think of plumbing. You spend time and money and resources to get everything working right, and then it kind of just works till something doesn't. But kind of just works as long as you still do that regular maintenance to keep things running. And skipping that maintenance means that things might look like they're working, but then potentially fail. And even worse, when you apply quick fixes to things, it might just mask the problem and create a more costly repair later. And keep it in plumbing, the great example I think of that is flex tape. I love putting flex tape on stuff because I don't know how to fix anything. And I look at it and say, yep, it's not leaking anymore. But I know the fact of the matter is whatever was really broken is still broken, and I need someone to come in and take a look and fix it. IT infrastructure is the same in a lot of ways, and we call that entropy tech debt. It's more though with IT, more than just that general entropy that goes on of things breaking. Because when you think
Right.
about use plumbing again, plumbing technology hasn't changed in what 2,000 years. It's basically the same,
A core of it. I mean,
Right.
it's some material advances, I
There,
think, Justin.
yeah, there's some incremental improvements, but at the end of
Yeah.
the day, it's basically the same.
Thank you,
And
John.
when you look at even over the last few years, not only does IT infrastructure have to deal with the day-to-day repairing things that break and keeping things up and running, but the entire landscape changes rapidly and immensely on a regular basis. If you had said 5 years ago that companies were going to be paying multi-millions of dollars in ransomware bounties or ransomware attacks, people would have looked at you funny and said that's not going to happen, and that now is a reality. And the one that touches all of us, I'd say, is this the work from home, work from anywhere revolution of last year. That was something that was not on the forefront of everybody's mind when their IT stack was put in place, and all of a sudden tools and things that were put in place for one thing were being asked to do another job. So tech debt, why is it important to keep it up to date? Well, just like that plumbing analogy, you don't want your pipe to burst when you need to do something with it. You'd rather have a controlled situation where you're fixing it ahead of time. And if we look at, go with piping, the Colonial Pipeline ransomware,
I agree.
that thank you. That was definitely a symptom of tech debt. Their ransomware was everything involved, but at the end of the day, there was an Exchange server that had a patch that wasn't applied, and that's what caused it. Now, whether it wasn't applied for because they didn't want the downtime or wasn't applied because they didn't have the resources, whatever the case may be, rather than a controlled, planned maintenance window to do that preventative maintenance, there was a catastrophic failure. So what can you do to combat tech debt? How do you pay off your tech debt in easy payments? In a lot of ways, it feels like what a Red Queen problem, which is the Lewis Carroll quote, takes all the running you can do to keep in the same place.
Mm-hmm.
And in some ways, that's accurate. You have to continually make improvements and make steps, do things like regular patching, regular updates, make sure that your support contracts and warranties are up to date on critical systems and critical software. You want to review any single points of failure, any single thing that if it fails, it brings everything down, and make sure that you've replaced that. And do a regular review of your environment to see what sorts of things you can improve, not just maintaining the day-to-day, but where you can find improvements, where you can make things more efficient, and regularly review that. So we do that with our customers with the quarterly business review and go through and look at that. But that's something that you can do in your own environment as well. Just make sure part of your regular cadence that you're going through those things. And that is this week's download.
That's awesome, Justin. Thank you so much. Really
You're
appreciate
welcome.
it. So, so we're going to jump in really hard. There's so much information here. We have a great resource, Katie, here. So this is so much to talk about. First off, it's really interesting that it's this Memorial Day weekend's coming up. So everyone get ready for some beaches and barbecues and time out. And it's exciting, but it's always a dangerous moment, right? Yeah, this is where compliance comes in. Like, are we going to comply with rules? Are people vaccinated? Or be safe? So it's the first time we haven't seen each other. I know some folks haven't seen each other in a year. It's kind of a thoughtful thing, so kind of keep in mind. So anyway, compliance. So what is compliance? It's complicated. It has a lot of meanings to different people. You can be, in a really large business, it's regulations that are imposed upon in a business by regulatory agencies, or they're part of an industry consortium like PCI. But some numbers that are important. KPMG, big consulting firm, accounting firm, basically said that their chief compliance officer said 24% don't have a function and process to capture changes in laws, regulations, and impact the business. So that means they don't even know what's happening out in the world, right? That's what that's saying. That they have policies in place that they don't even know if that's still accurate. And 35% indicate existing compliance functions don't maintain current regulatory obligations. So more than a third are knowingly out of compliance. So you have to assume how many more people don't know they're out of compliance because they didn't know that the regulation changed. So you can take those numbers together. It's a lot of stuff, right? So, and those are from large Fortune 500 companies. So what happens is smaller companies and small organizations that have to be compliant, or maybe they're not necessarily compliant, but they're serving compliant industries. So by downstream association, they're now forced to be in the same level of compliance. So that's where this is such a big challenge, right?
I mean, Justin, we see a lot. Yeah, is exactly that. Is that
right.
A number of our clients, while they're and I mean, it is changing, especially with the New York Shield Act. There are some compliance requirements that New York State companies are going to have to adhere to. But even without that, we're seeing it's not so much that it's a small office, small business, but their clients are those Fortune 500 companies, and by extension, they need to meet those in order to keep the contract with that client. They need to meet the same compliancy requirements that company is putting on them.
Right. So and that's kind of why we partnered with Kaseya. Thank you, Katie. Part of that, and I spoke about it at an event the other day about compliance and how we do it. I don't know if Matt, if you want to roll that clip there, or that's the time for it. Maybe it's not.
We work quite a bit with Kaseya on it with their compliance manager tool, just to kind of interpret it. Also, some of it is our own reading of it, working with other folks, and honestly, we're always open to more input on it because we feel like it's an evolving thing. Like continuous monitoring is always a great question. What does that mean?
So there it is. What does that mean? So that's why I'll give you like a live example from our our practice. Then I'd love to hear from Katie about what she sees, because she talks to a lot of partners and get some feedback on that. But how we ended up in this compliance world, kind of circuitous route. We're not a compliance company, right? We're not what we do. We don't promote ourselves as a company that does compliance. But I think really what it comes down to is that our customers are being forced to be compliant, if not compliant adjacent. And I'll give you an example in our practice was that one of our larger advertising agency customers got a questionnaire that was a NIST or ISO 27001 or a blend, kind of their own. All these large companies have their own flavor of compliance questionnaires, and this was not even before they pitched. This was in the early procurement stage of their process. And so, what we're seeing is that the companies had to be prepared for that kind of question attestation before they're even allowed to even conduct business with some of these larger companies. And this goes back to earlier compliance, where mostly large companies need to have a third-party risk management program in place. So now all of a sudden you start seeing where compliance gets really important for small and medium businesses. So Katie, I guess if you have something, I think you work on this quite a bit, so I'd love to hear your insight.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I would love to chime in here. And I'm going to tie in a couple points that Justin actually mentioned earlier. Right. We claim that we're in this new era of cybersecurity threats because we've seen our landscape change so much just in the last year alone. And realistically, I'm going to throw it out there. We were talking about the Olive Garden earlier, and ransomware, it seems to be kind of that threat du jour. We're also in the new era and the new wave of cybersecurity regulations, like you were talking about, George. And, we're looking at the latest attacks, and some would argue that the same old vulnerabilities are to blame. And that's because some organizations are dragging their feet by implementing these critical security measures to protect themselves and their organization. The National Institute of Standards and Technology, NIST, they released an infographic in the wake of the Colonial Pipeline attack. And the infographic itself, it provided some great tips like configuring your operating systems and using third-party software to allow only authorized applications on computers.
Right.
That infographic, it also talked about developing and implementing, an incident recovery plan with defined roles and strategies for decision-making. We've even seen the Biden administration take some drastic shifts to focus on cybersecurity. President Biden, he signed a pretty ambitious executive order on May 12th to address the increasingly sophisticated threats that all businesses are facing. It's no longer just these Fortune 500 companies. Cyber threats are trickling down to those small SMBs. You guys have that same data that large companies have. And unfortunately, what cyber criminals have figured out is you don't have as sophisticated controls in place. So you're actually an easier target for them to get that data. And they're making their money that they need to do off of it or to sell off of it.
Right. And that this goes back to that as Justin earlier, that cyber claim, people started getting cyber liability insurance and now they're hitting the insurance. And the insurers are paying, so now it's become a profitable enterprise. And and it's almost like they make a baseball analogy, but these guys are hitting singles all day versus in that the grand slam is great. That $5 million or $10 million or $30 million ransom is great, but if you're hitting these 150,000, you're doing it 4 times a day. All of a sudden, it's it's a diversified client base. If you want to call it that, and that's a scary thing, right? That's the part that I think, and the other thing I think is really important is that if you look at most, in the United States, 50% of businesses are small, medium enterprises, right? That's like kind of the as much as it's the kind of the backbone of where most people work. Most people don't work for a Fortune 500 company. Most people work for a small, medium company.
And I think it's interesting, even like when we try to simplify it for our clients, it's sort of, at the end of the day, it's like, if you're not compliant, these companies simply won't work with you. So there is business to be lost if you don't. It's a monetary risk at this point. Even if you assume, which we always try to stress, that you won't be targeted, it's not if, it's when. Right. Showing up with these compliances is going to make you a viable business partner at this point.
Well,
Yeah, and for good reason too, because like we're talking about the ransomware, if you do the things to protect yourself, and let's say you have rock solid backups of everything, and you get hit with ransomware, and you say, well, it's not really a problem because I'll just restore from backup. The new tactics are to exfiltrate data, to copy data out and threaten to release it, and not having a compliant process, a process that really, it's a process that you're compliant with to categorize your data and to know what data you have and to protect data that has PII or other important stuff. You have no way of knowing, did they collect all of my employees' social security numbers? Do they have my client info? And you just have to assume that they do.
It's really terrifying, and it becomes like, well, what do you do, and where does compliance fit into this, right? And that's what we partnered with Kaseya with the compliance manager tool, and their process they've kind of put together, and we put our little bit of English, a little bit of Valiant spin on it, to make it our own. That's what, because obviously everyone has a different. The core is the same, but the client base and the verticals we service are different. I know, Katie, you work a lot with folks that do CMMC, which is a very complex, different level for government contractors functionally, which is not our client base, but it has a lot of analogs to NIST. They're very similar based on one another. They kind of scale back and forth. So, and I think that from there, and if you like, what the process for the software to do all this, how does that work? Like, what's the best? Okay, what do you see as the best process, the best practices in your this view?
Yeah, no, absolutely. And before I jump into that, we've mentioned a lot about NIST, and in all honesty, NIST is the guidance. They provide guidance and a set of standards that companies should adhere to for their security controls. Realistically, all of these new data privacy laws and security laws are putting increased pressure on organizations to adopt reasonable security controls for that personal data, like what that was mentioned.
Oh, yeah.
For instance, I heard the New York Shield Act was mentioned. New York rolled out the Stop Hacks and Improve Electronic Data Security Act, which that went into effect just as COVID started to hit a lot of areas in March of 2020.
Correct.
But this requires businesses to implement and maintain reasonable safeguards, like was mentioned, to protect their security, confidentiality, and the integrity of this private information. If we push it across and we look at folks on the other side of the country, we have the CPRA, or the California Privacy Rights Act, that does just the same thing for the folks over in California. They want to put controls on how their personal information is handled. And quite honestly, I think we all want that for our own personal data, our credit card numbers, our social security numbers, because we all know the hassle it takes once that gets breached and what we do afterwards. So just to tie it into your question, George,
exactly.
I know I have a long-winded response.
No,
here.
I love it. I love it. Learning. Yeah, it's funny. Every time we do these, I learn like a little tidbit, something here and there. It's great. Thank you. Please.
Yeah, not a problem. So for me, I like to say with our software, compliance comes down to the 2 Ds, data and documentation. So when it comes to our compliance manager solution to help businesses adhere to their regulatory requirements, there are 4 key components. First of all, just to go to that number 1 D, it's all around the data side of things. We're a software solution. And in all honesty, what Valiant will be able to do is they're going to install software in your environment that will scan and automate around 40 to 80% of the manual required labor to collect all this information. You have to think about where all of our data lives in today's world. Our information is strewn across platforms, saved on computers, with folks being remote. COVID really changed that landscape, and some personal devices, which is a pretty big no-no when it comes to compliance, have been used for work-related, reasons. And it's important that we audit that data to see where your information's living, because all it takes for an audit to be placed on your organization is PII to be found on the wrong computer. And nobody wants to be investigated by the government or to go through an audit.
Right. Or I mean, here in New York, if it is even a minor breach, now you're reporting it to the Attorney General. Now you're opening up yourself for penalties. Or once again, I always feel I say it's like, you really don't want your taxes audited. You know, invariably something's going to come through the mix, right? Like, less, you know, not to say that that's wrong per se, but probably you don't want to deal with it. It's a lot of work.
That's so you do all the things that you're supposed to do to pay your taxes and make sure you do it as
Right.
you know, as right as you know how. And yeah, it's the same thing.
Exactly. Exactly. Yeah.
Absolutely. We don't
And,
want
you know-
those eyes on us. It's inviting too much to be put in our court. And in all honesty, George, sorry to cut you off there.
No, not at all. That's fine. And I think it goes back to, you know, one of the things you mentioned earlier was incident response, incident plan. And what we and just doing these with clients and even ourselves, what we found was really interesting is when you start having the idea that it's not if, it's when, right? And by going through the exercise of collecting the data, running the tools, building the policies. I mean, I've been working with Justin on this for a number of months now for various customers internally, and you really learn all your deficits. It's a really eye-opening. I mean, when we do it with customers, they're like, oh wow, I didn't know that. What do you think we should do? And it's not a matter, and what it is, it's a helpful education for them because, you know, many companies may have a business continuity plan, but no one looks at it. No one knows where it is. No, it doesn't exist. You know, so it's really important. But
maybe it's not updated. You know,
correct. Right. Exactly. You know, it might be something on the back of a napkin, kind of like for backup. You know, but
and as technology changes, you know, it's going to be different. And
like having a fire escape plan, fire drill plan, and not changing it when you move.
That's a great metaphor. Yeah.
That's right. Yes, it is. It's good. So, you know, and unfortunately, what we found too is that a lot of, and we try really hard to combat this, this selling or putting fear in people's minds, was you just don't want to make people like, you don't want to do like that, like kind of the hard insurance, like what will happen to your family if you were gone? You know, kind of thing for life insurance. And that's exactly. I'm not, you know, I know I'm not a fan of that. I like people to understand what their risks are and to make an informed decision, right? I think that's it's hard, but it's a better way of doing it.
And explaining it as a business decision, not just be scared of the cybersecurity boogeyman. Like this is just a normal thing that you want to make sure you're still making money, right?
Correct. One of the reasons I like the compliance manager, the methodology with it too, because we're working with our clients to build the policies that they want to be compliant with. We're not there. I mean, there are certain things that where, you know, if they say they want their password policy to be everybody is password 123, we're going to say no, that's not. That's not. But we're not dictating to them security or things or pieces that they don't want to adopt, and then we're matching them to the things that they want to do.
It's really true. And thank you, Ray, for that cybersecurity boogeyman sticker.
I'm on it. It's on my Etsy tomorrow.
I think Matt, get on that. Let's make some stickers. I think that's a great idea. Thank you, Matt, for popping in there. But yeah, I mean, it's you know, it's laid out, it's reasonable, it's logical. You can make business decisions based on where you are. And I think that as if you're a business owner now, you have to make a decision: is do you want to get ahead of this regulatory kind of change, or do you want to be scrambling to kind of do it and not get the benefit of doing it in a controlled manner where you really can build your cybersecurity kind of internal practice and make it really part of your company's like day to day with what they do.
To use the fire escape analogy again, you don't want to wait until you have that first kitchen fire to figure out how you're going to escape.
Or that all of your extinguishers are expired.
Right. Yeah. Right. It's like just do the start with little pieces.
Repeat. I mean, the same with the expiration dates and, you know, technology changing, and learn the new stuff, and get a partner who can help with that, especially small and medium businesses.
Yeah,
you know,
100%. And realistically, with our software, I know, Justin, you mentioned the second D to compliance, which is documentation. And as everybody's talking about, a part of it is just staying up to date with your data. With our solution, we can run regular comprehensive compliance assessments. As your data changes, your documentation is going to change. And it's important to stay in front of all of that because realistically, when it comes to compliance, if it's not documented, in the eyes of an auditor, it didn't happen. And honestly, we want to make sure that that stays up to date as your data changes, as your operations evolve. It's important to stay in front of that because nobody ever wants to be a sitting duck or have to be reactionary when something like this happens. It's much better to be proactive in the start of things, partner with that trusted vendor who can come in, assist with these activities, and make sure that you're going to be in a better place. Because cybersecurity, security overall, compliance is part of your operations. And if you guys face downtime, just imagine the financial impact that's going to have on your company. On average, a ransomware attack, it causes 7 days worth of downtime. I mean, that's huge.
Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. And Ray, that's a great. There's one of our comment reviewer, Ray. Key addressing change is the hardest part. It really is very difficult. I mean, and just constantly, and also the interpretation. It's keeping abreast of it, interpretation of it, and what the current interpretation of it. Sometimes even the law may not change, but how it's being enforced, applied can change dramatically. So. Yeah, it's a complex topic. It's one that's all over. I think it's going to be more and more complicated. It's going to be a really. It's just a constant thing. So it's I equated it to I'll show my age here. It's kind of like Y2K, like when everyone was preparing for years, then nothing happened, and everyone's like, well, why do we need all this Y2K business? It's like no, but people did all this work for years, and in some ways. Compliance management is kind of like that. Like, well, why are we doing all this compliance work? It's like, so nothing happens. Yeah, if it does happen, we know what we're going to do. Yeah,
so it's Y2K every year.
That's a good point.
There's always the next one.
That's true. It's always something. So that's great. All right. So I don't know if you guys have anything else for today. I think we'll wrap it up. Katie, I just want to say thank you so much for being an awesome guest on our live stream and being part of it, and love to have you back. And we got, this is our spring review. Maybe we'll have our fall. Who knows what's going to happen then? Super exciting. So next week we have a really great topic around building operational resilience. We probably have a special guest, but that's we'll see what happens with that. But it's really all about what happens when things go bad. The kind of like. The planned events, maybe even the Black Swan event, the one that you didn't anticipate. So there's a lot going on there. So it's really important to think about these things. I could talk about that for hours on end. It's like a topic I get really excited about, much like compliance. And but we have that. We have one on 610. We're also excited about hurricanes. We're going to also hurricanes and disasters. We're going to have our own Matt Hefner, who's our LA staff. Talk about wildfires and stuff going on out there. It all impacts operations and probably resilience, then some weather and how that impacts us. So I really appreciate everyone participating today. Awesome stream. If you like it, please check us out on YouTube, LinkedIn, Facebook, or in normal places. And if you like it, like and subscribe. I said I really appreciate everyone's participation. So thanks. And thanks, Katie, for being a special guest. Have a great day.
Absolutely. Thanks for having me.
You're welcome. Thanks. All right.
Take care.
Bye now.
Bye.